from the finance and accounting and PVP, and we're going to shift gears and talk sales strategy. Something that I love. Most people don't realize, but I actually cut my teeth in sales, international sales for about 2 or 3 years.
Sales leads the organization, right?
That was fun. Yeah. Sales drives revenue, and revenue is king. So today we're super stoked. We've got a guest, Brent from Winalytics. Then that's for those who want to look online. It is Winalytics, WINALYTICS.com.
Yeah, they're a Boston-based, nationally recognized sales consulting firm focused on driving increased performance in sales teams. But before we get there, I think we want to talk a little bit just about what Brent's going to come in and talk more about selling in the midst of a pandemic, right? How do you do that, right? Because people are not buying new services; they're going to either keep things the same or just bring it in house because they're looking to cut costs in parallel with their revenue decreasing. And so, how do you sell in the midst of a pandemic?
But to bring this a little bit back home, I feel like, in preparing for this and talking to Brent a few days ago as we were preparing for this podcast, I used the word altruistic selling, and it's something that you and I have thrown around. Not sure where that came from, but it was just like, okay, all bets are off. We're in the midst of a pandemic, complete economic shutdown, the fastest drop in economic activity this country has ever seen. Like you said, nobody's going to be buying new products. So how do you continue that momentum in sales and marketing? And it's that altruistic sort of approach.
And so it's something we've always at GrowthLab always embraced, and it's often been
since day one.
We've done office hours, we've done events, we've done different
university
things.
platforms, accelerators.
But mostly the needs for that, or the people that are looking for that service, it comes out of the universities, accelerators, or office hours at a WeWork or CIC, where there's an audience that's like looking for some of that, kind of call it some of that free advice or access to experts. But in the midst of the pandemic, that just all changed, right? Everybody started needing some of that advice, needing that ad hoc, like, what do we do? And that's where we kind of broadened our horizons. It was I say maybe less focus on those universities and more just take this approach of altruistic selling and just giving relevant information to the market.
And the best part is, like, guess what? This week we actually hired our first national sales director, which is Greg. His name's Greg Manley, and he comes from the West Coast. We're actually really excited for him. So even in the midst of this pandemic and in the midst of this really unknown, like, what does a sales and marketing journey look like for customers? We're bringing on Greg, and we're excited for that. He brings a lot of years of experience, specifically in financial services. So shout out to Greg. Unfortunately, he is in quarantine for next 2 weeks because he's been flying around the country and moving his stuff
back from the West Coast.
So yeah. I just want to, one of the things that kind of, as I talked to Brent this week, one of the things that really popped into my head was, and I remember an old mentor of mine, and obviously you met Stuart many years ago, he would always say one of the most defining attributes, and I still have this in an email, one of the most defining attributes of a real entrepreneur is their ability to deal with delayed gratification. And I just feel like that quote, although that was from 5, 6, 7 years ago, that quote, and in the current paradigm that we're in, and talking about altruistic selling, this is like, wow, right? That is what we do, is like delayed gratification. We put a lot of effort into these things, and we don't really know if it's what's going to come out of this.
To translate that, delayed gratification, meaning it's not going to be a quick win, like it's not going to be a high hit rate. We've in our office hours over the last 3 months, we've been doing them every day, at least every day with GrowthLab Jump, the podcast. There's people of all sorts in there, from large companies down to one-person shops, and some target customers in there as well. But it doesn't really matter, right? Like we are bringing this information to the market, and whoever's willing to jump on the office hours, we're willing to talk to them about what's their issue at hand.
And Brent talks about the 4 principles of Winalytics, not to sort of open that up just yet. Yeah. But one of the principles that he talks about, I also sort of as I walked away from that call we had with him, I said, these office hours that we did was very much altruistic, right? We didn't know. It was just like, okay, we got to be out there. People are looking for information. Not that we didn't have other things to do, right? We obviously did. But we found that this office hours at first was very altruistic, right? That we didn't expect anything, right? We did it with no intentions except sharing information, being sort of a sounding board for so many small and medium-sized businesses.
Yeah.
And I mean, I got to tell you, we've gotten emails from across the country just saying thank you. And what we have found is that these office hours, which is going to hit on one of his principles, this office hours is actually turned into part of our sales and marketing strategy. And yes, it's been a shift from sort of like, okay, let's see what happens, to, hey, this is a great opportunity to talk to 2, 3, 4 potential leads, because you're going to be sitting there in office hours for 30 minutes, 60 minutes. Why not use that opportunity to bring customers in? And you're like, wait a minute, you're going to have 2, 3 customers or leads sort of in the mix. I said, well, what's one of the things that we always get asked before we sign any engagement agreement? Can I get a referral? Can I talk to your customers? It's like, well, office hours, I have customers, I have people, I have no idea who they are. And then we have people that are obviously in our lead pipeline. So
it leverages our time too.
And it leverages our time, which, by the way, we always say that is the secret sauce to business success, right? So with all that said, let's bring Brent in and let's jump right in.
Cool. Brent, how are you today?
Hey, guys.
Hey, Brent. Thank you very much. I'm excited to have you on. I love sales and marketing, even though I'm a finance guy. I always start my pitches by saying I'm not an accountant. I'm a sales guy at heart. So Brent, we've met many times, and in full disclosure, Brent is also a customer of ours. And so Brent, why don't you take a moment and kind of tell us a little bit about yourself, how you kind of started this entrepreneurial journey of yours, and let's a little pitch on your company.
Yeah, so our focus at Winalytics is really helping in this altruistic selling mode to think about how do we sell around the things buyers value. Don't think about ourselves, our product and features, but really what's the problem that we solve for our customers? What's keeping them from solving that problem? And what's the win to solving the problem? So we talk about what's your buyer goal, what's their gap to goal, and what's the payoff to closing, and so or to working together. And so it's very much aligned with our topic today on altruistic selling, because as we move into this world where folks are hurting, right? They're laying people off, budgets are tight. The opportunity to deliver value early in the discovery process, what we're saying is, hey, we're going to be a trusted advisor. We're looking out for your best interest. We're not going to sell you something just to sell you something. We really want to see if there's a fit, if there's a good relationship here. And so we're willing to, give some stuff away for free, provide some value, and that may, start a conversation. So that's what we focus on, very aligned to the topics for today.
Cool. And so how did you start?
Yeah, so I was a revenue leader at a series of companies. I mean, starting way back, I was trained as a PhD social scientist and learned how to code data. And it turns out, code interviews. Turns out that a sales call is not really that different from an interview, right? That you do for a research project. If you just pay attention to the patterns in terms of what people are telling you, what's the win for them? What are they trying to solve? What's keeping them from solving it? Buyers will build a bullseye for you. You don't have to do a lot of work trying to pitch them. Ask them good questions. You draw them out. You ask them another question. So it was that kind of looking for patterns that I had been trained to do. And then I was a revenue leader at Kaplan first. Then EduVentures, which was an emerging growth company, was sort of the advisory board company, or Gartner for higher education.
Yeah.
And then had an opportunity to run a company called Collegiate Link, which we quickly sold to a company called Student Voice. And what I saw was there was sort of a pattern here. I just described to how in all of those situations, I train sales teams to engage their buyers around they're asking the right questions to draw them to value, to what could support a partnership, and what would be the win? What would be the payoff? And so there was success there as a revenue leader. And then so I saw an opportunity to start doing that as a consultant. And we started in higher ed because that was my background, but have since, applied the same to business operations and IT solutions, to retail and Marcom solutions, to a lot of HR and corporate learning and other areas. Have seen that this approach of really letting your buyers tell you what they're going to find valuable and what are the right next steps to deepen the relationship can be applied not only to a bunch of sectors, but also companies of different sizes. We work with emerging growth companies, sub $1 million companies, but we also work with the Verisks and the Cars.com and the Ascend Learnings of the world that are hundreds of millions and billion-dollar companies.
So you've obviously been through a few economic cycles.
Yep.
How does this, so the theme of today is selling in a post-COVID, 18, 24-month recovery. God knows what all this will end up looking like over the next 2 years. So here's the theme, have you seen this before?
Yeah. And I think you just described I think this is a economic crisis with an additional layer, which is, I think those of us, been around doing this long enough, that there is another side. And so what smart business people do is start to plan for the other side. I think another layer on this is, just as we all know, the level of uncertainty around, the reopening and the phases of reopening, and just kind of learning. You've got a health crisis on top of an economic crisis. So I think that uncertainty is an additional layer. But the same principle that you guys just, described in your preamble of kind of laying seeds for how we can be valuable. There's very good research on this, that companies that invest in sales and marketing during a recession emerge much stronger than those that cut back on sales and marketing.
I'm 100% with you. I'm glad we thought about it. So altruistic selling is only one piece of the equation. When I heard you talk about your 4 principles, the 4 principles of Winalytics, my head automatically went to 15 years ago, Strategic Marketing 101. Why don't we talk a little bit about where this 4 principles came from, and let's dig a little deeper into them. I'm actually excited. I almost feel like these 4 principles are your bullseye.
Yeah, definitely. And we think of these as 4 from the folks we've worked on the kind of freemium to paid, this altruistic selling. These are the 4 principles. As a company, it might be slightly different, but just these are probably 4 principles, less the company overall and more on this approach to opening up buyer conversations.
So can you run us through those, your 4 principles?
Yeah, absolutely. So and I'll just say them, and then we can unpack them one at a time.
Yeah.
The first is, particularly when you're giving away something for free, is have a buyer strategy. There might be folks that take a free trial inbound, but outbound, we should know where we think we can land and advance customers the quickest. So have a strategy of a buyer type, a buyer persona, a buyer segment you're going after. Second is, in that early engagement, really, if you're going to give something away for free, simplify value delivery. Give them something in a 1 hour. We'll give you an example of a training company in a 1 hour Zoom session. Give them something in an automation platform, an individual campaign. Just give them something simple that will move their business or their organization forward.
So this is different from the sort of value proposition or go-to-market strategy. This is really how do you mechanically get your service or product to your customer?
That's right. And the relationship is, if you think about your go-to-market strategy, we always think about you want to have a buyer strategy, but then you want to have buyer tests, right? You want to think about what segments, what roles am I testing with what value prop, and you want to simplify value delivery to each of those. And so you might be, looking for different areas of value by different buyer type.
Got it.
So that's the way we think about go-to-market strategy, broadly. is define what your buyer types are, and then what is the area of value that might get that buyer to engage the most quickly.
So 1 is define your buyer strategy. 2 is simplify the value delivery. And that's not an easy one, right? Even in our business as a service business, we were just having this conversation last night, right? How are we tweaking? How are we touching the customer? Are we adding too much value, not enough value, right? So simplifying the value delivery is critical. And number 3 is also a very important piece too.
Number 3, if we're starting in that free mode and we want to support you in this difficult time, is you have to limit the scope and be clear on how you're limiting the scope. And number 4 that's related is, you're going to limit the scope, but you're going to give them something valuable, and you're going to tease the promised land. And that's a quote I have to give credit to Andy Raskin, who wrote one of the best sales posts ever called The Best Sales Deck Ever. You could Google it, Andy Raskin, Best Sales Deck Ever. But the idea is we're going to give them something of value, and we'll give you some examples. And those are going to point to, hey, you can use this thing, this individual campaign, this individual training, this individual messaging technique. But there are actually 3 or 4 other, 5 or 6 other things like that could really start to change your business. So with the way you deliver value, you limit the scope, you're clear on what the time is or the number of users or what functionality they can use, but then you're also teasing the promised land, kind of setting up, what might a deeper relationship with your company look like.
So it sounds like number 4, the teasing the promised land, that's really an offshoot or a function of number 3, right? Once you've defined the box, the scope of the service or the product you're delivering, then the upselling, this is almost like a function of upselling.
Yeah,
right?
That's mine goes right to HubSpot. And a lot of people are familiar with HubSpot, so let's use that as an example, right? Like they don't just do that in the first instance, right? There's always room to expand your engagement.
Well, they got me 2 weeks ago. I was telling Brent that. It was just like, oh, the sales module, it's open, great. And then all of a sudden, it's only until June 30th. I was like, oh.
And then you get hooked on it. You have to pay for it.
And then what's the conversation we had?
It's a great strategy, right? Give a taste of what it is. Let people experience it, and that is the promised land. Experience the promised land, and then what HubSpot does is pull it back.
So, Brent, one of the things you said this week was that most customers or most businesses fail with principle number 1, which is the buyer strategy. And the funny thing is, my head actually went to, because this is something that we really suffer, or maybe suffer is too strong, but something we trivialize over a lot, which is number 3. It's the scope of what we're delivering, because you don't want to feel like you're nickeling and diming customers. You do want to be able to go that extra mile if the customer wants, especially like right now. But you said that buyer strategy is number 1. Give me some examples on like where you see these sort of cracks, breaks.
Yeah, and so limit the scope is another one. But if we have the right buyers and we give them too much, we're probably okay with that, right? We're going to evolve towards the right, towards the right outcome. But I'll take an example of AdmitHub, a company we work with on both sides of that. When we started working with them, it's a Boston-based company that's an AI-powered chatbot that really can automate and personalize FAQs. So now you come to a website and, not only can you get to a chatbot, but somebody that knows your history of interaction, that based on every question gets you to more detailed questions in the knowledge base, so you can get the exact questions you need. In the case of higher ed, questions on financial aid, things you might not feel embarrassed to call and ask somebody about, or questions about who else, like you or has a similar academic background or, similar kind of SES background, who else is like you, what resources are available. So you can get a very personalized interaction with a campus that scales. So when we first started working with them, they had just a couple dozen customers, but they had 8 different flavors of customers with all very different needs. For the kind of questions or the knowledge base that you that you need behind it. So every flavor of customer, we all know in business, has a slightly different execution strategy. So when you think about great, you get them to the top of the funnel, you convert them to the freemium model. But if you haven't kind of narrowed to where you think you can win and run a couple of tests, you end up with a wide variety of customers, your operating processes on the backside become hard to scale and hard to build, kind of a consistent go-to-market and execution strategy. So it's a good example to shift to the altruistic selling. They did narrow to a certain couple of segments in higher education, away from some of the nonprofit work or the government work they were doing. They narrowed, they won quickly, they grew very rapidly over a couple of years. Fast forward a couple of years, now they're in an environment where they've kind of won in the higher ed space, saw in this crisis schools, K-12 schools, local government organizations really struggling. People can't come in, really struggling to answer all the number of emails, website hits, calls, trying to service their community. And so use the kind of free model to say, take what they're doing, tweak a little bit the knowledge base, but in a very pointed way. And not that they're not going to welcome higher ed institutions also to use the chatbot, but using it to expand their market in some very targeted ways, where they can target local governments, K-12 school districts, build kind of a cadence of a new market entry strategy. And they're basically giving them, just a very set of high value campaigns and functionality around schedules, office openings, unemployment benefits, just a few campaigns, very valuable to run. What they're holding in reserve, kind of the promised land, is, great that you've engaged and automated the answer. As you actually, if you engage more deeply with us, we can run more campaign types. We can also give you better data on your constituency, which you can't now roll up from your phone calls and emails. What are they asking about? What are the needs that you're not meeting currently that you should be meeting? So the tool over time, if you unlock that, becomes a really strategic kind of a client service technology.
When you're advising customers so I'm a big fan. I mean, I remember, 10, 15 years ago, again, back in corporate, probably even longer than that. When I was in strategy, we talked, we did a lot of strategic marketing work. And it was sort of like, hey, you cannot even get up to bat without real strong market or customer segmentation analysis. And then be able to define what problem are you solving for that customer. I'm a big fan of customer segmentation, and Steve, you and I, we spend a lot of time on that too, right?
It's one of the first things you talk about with customers is, they come to us, whether it's for, a startup looking to build a business model or raise capital on, one of the first things you do is, what does your strategic marketing look like? Who is your target customer? What's the market look like?
Right, because you can't even begin to think about that unless you know who is your customer and be able to truly box them in. So Brent, when you're talking about defining buyer strategy, how do you help customers think about customer segmentation? Is it sort of you are a 0 to $10 million revenue company, or you are a construction company versus a high-tech company? What other ways you kind of slice and dice market customer segmentation?
Yeah, I mean, the market segments are key, right? Kind of the size of the industry. If you are, selling into the corporate HR sector, the needs of that sub 100 company are very different than the gazelles that are, kind of in the 1,000 to 2,000, growing quickly. Very different than the enterprise that have, HR in the division. So that matters a lot. But I think something you guys alluded to, and this is a core HubSpot principle, is starting with that buyer persona, right? That who among your existing customer base, what are the consistent buyer personas, and what are the consistent problems that you're solving for them? So I think the buyer persona is actually the most important. Right. Thinking of why people have bought from you, and then how are those represented across different segments. But I do want to say, I mean, some of you may have seen the work from Gartner. Now owns the corporate executive board, which has done some really interesting research on the new buyer environment. And what they say in all sectors, 6.8 decision makers in typical buying process, because there's so much information on the web, so much information on social media, and we get less than 20% of the entire purchasing process. So the segmentation you talked about, we have to be able to speak to people very personally now. A generic message doesn't work. I mean, people, what they want to typically hear about is, what have you done for people like me? So the persona matters. And then what have you done for people that are similar to me? How have you worked with other similar clients?
Yep.
So actually defining by segment and by buyer persona where you've already had success and being able to integrate those success stories, into your website, into your sales conversations become pretty important.
Yeah.
So the 20%, are you saying that most of the buying process is actually out of your control, or maybe not out of your control, but it's part of the learning process before you even get a chance to sell, traditionally sell to a customer?
Yeah, I mean, it could be, it's, if you think of 100%, 60% or roughly 60% of the time on the buyer side is spent collecting information on your website, other competitors' websites, going to, there's all these comparison for any product. You have a comparison site or a review site. So they're going to collect a bunch of information. I mean, they may talk to you in the meantime, but of the, 60% is collecting information on you and alternatives. 20% roughly is in internal meetings, kind of evaluating. 20% of the time is spent with buyers. So we have a very short window to make an impact. And the way we can make an impact is quickly getting to what they value and what's keeping them from getting to what they value.
That's cool.
What's the payoff?
That's actually refreshing, Steve, right? Because as we look back at the evolution in our sales and marketing in our own business, granted, for the first 2 or 3 years, we're looking at the salespeople, right? Me and you, and then trying to sell to employees and not just customers, right? And then it was only in the second half of our journey that we doubled down, not even doubled down, but we actually created the marketing machine, right? We began focusing on inbound content, beyond just your traditional website. And it has been 6 years almost, and we finally just hired a national director of sales.
What was our like number one observation when we did do more content initially, the four years
the sales
ago?
Conversion cycle dropped significantly. That's for sure.
Yeah, it didn't so much drive inbounds for us at the time, but it reduced that time to sale, right? Because they could do that research that 60% of the time that they're out there looking at comparables. They could read information from us, and that's where we started kind of this altruistic selling model, which was, hey, if you want to do it yourself, here's what you do.
Yeah, no, we do that all the time, right?
Do it yourself until you're ready to outsource it, then come to us.
Right. Anything else you want to add, Brent, beyond the principles of Winalytics? How do you? I'd like to just kind of poke your brain a little bit here, like, where do you see sales and marketing over the next? I mean, we cannot continue to not sell, right? At some point, the economy does begin to open up, and employees do begin to come back to work. Where do you see sales and marketing in sort of post-COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this goes to your segment analysis, right? That just being smart about what we're seeing in our work is there's a broad range. If you're a part of the turning things digital right now, you're in pretty good shape, right? If it's either in the education space or the insurance space or CFO suites that are about just kind of capturing and managing risk. Other sectors were obviously, Toast, 1,000 and 2,000 employees. TripAdvisor, just a massive layoff. So being smart as you think about growing your sales and marketing, what sectors are growing and what are not is key in this environment. There's a company just on the south of Boston called Winalytics that does direct mail automation, and they did a really nice analysis just looking at Google keywords on what target industries popped: health and medical, financial and accounting, insurance, office products, business consulting. And so it's not about growing their business, and they're largely an inbound shop. And they have a freemium offer, which is, you can have one user, no limit on the time, but it's one user and one campaign type. So all of their work is then targeting those areas that are growing. So I think thinking about what you do, how you can point into those areas that are growing. I mean, for us, right, a large enterprise team still needs to do coaching and skill development, but it's all virtual now. So how can we lean into the fact that folks have more time, but they're not together? So training has to shift to just lean into, making that possible. So I think thinking about, what areas are continuing to grow and how your value prop has to change to serve a world that either be purely digital or a blend, right, of in-person and digital will help a lot.
And, I'm going to add, so one last thing, we're kind of coming to the end of the half hour here, but this doesn't just apply to sales and marketing. I mean, this really applies to people strategy. Brent, we're actually in the process of hiring a financial analyst in the next few weeks. And, that process, I know for a fact that, she started that process 6 months ago, right? She did the 60% of the time she spent on the process was collecting information on us. And I know because I know who she works with and, she's doing her due diligence. 20% is probably internally with her mom and dad or her family, processing and thinking about this. And then 20% is us, right? It's that moment that we have with them. And that's not a lot of time. In the scheme of things, you have to be super impactful as a sales individual or as a hiring manager to grab the attention, because you're competing against many other companies.
So, cool. That's great, Brent. Thanks so much for joining us. I think there's been some great great message, great tidbits. The 4 pillars of selling in the midst of this environment. Like, what do? You have to define your buyer strategy. Understand what it is you're going to deliver, what value is it, limit the scope, and then sell the promised land.
It's not limit the scope, it's make sure, both buyer and seller.
Put bookends on it, right?
Bookends, yeah.
So those are great, as well as, some of the other kind of snippets you put in there.
Cool.
But thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And if people want to get in touch with you, how do they get in touch with you?
Go ahead.
If people want to get in touch with you, how do they get in touch with you best?
They can email me directly at bkeltner@winalytics.com, or they can come right to our website. There's some interesting stuff there they can download, or they can email info@winalytics.com. And that's, again, as Dan spelled it out, WINALYTICS.
It's all about winning. Cool.
It's all about winning. And just one more, if you guys can snip this in.
Sure.
Just wanted to pick up, Dan, on your topic on timing. Because not forcing the timing in this environment is critical. And so I'm thinking of a company called Plus Delta Partners that sells into higher education and medical. That's, those two have been crushed. But the way those sectors are coming back is, first, respond to the crisis, get everything up online, or in the case of healthcare, respond to COVID. Second is nurture the revenue cycle, right?
Right.
Third, they do fundraiser training. So third is then all of those things that enable revenue, and that will probably start to come back online in July and August. So they need to position, and they're doing these 1-hour Zoom sessions to deliver value. It gives some people some value added on how do you restart past fundraising conversations, how do you prep for that next phase. But you have to play to the timing. You can't rush the timing, otherwise you'll kind of alienate your buyers.
That's right. You'll scare them off.
Yeah.
Especially right now. You got to be much more empathetic and compassionate in these times.
Let them lead the bus.
Define it. Yep.
Cool. Buyer empathy. It's a key word this time. So listen, guys, thanks so much for having me on. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Awesome. Cool. See you on the flip side. Thanks,
Brent.
Bye-bye.
Cool. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Great to have you here.
Yeah. I love talking sales and marketing. Especially, I love talking because I think about it through the lens of finance and accounting and business strategy. So it's good. Anyways, we may just end up splitting this into two podcasts because we did go over by 10 minutes. So, all right, cool. That's
a wrap. Thanks a lot.
Nice job. Appreciate it.